Thanks for joining. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for some other people to join the session. All right. Chris, are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am. Anytime you're ready, John.
All right, sounds great. Well, thanks everyone for joining the Lunch and Learn session today, which is sponsored by the ITS Canada Advanced Traffic Management Systems Technical Committee. My name is Jonathan Darton. I'm a director with IBI Group and am currently serving as chair of the ITS Canada ATMS Technical Committee. Just a quick intro of the committee. On the screen, we have the four primary focus areas of the committee. The ATMS Technical Committee has been created to share best practices and technical information, promote the deployment of ITS, encourage open interfaces and standards, and explore innovative systems deployments to increase efficiency and improve productivity. Committee members have an opportunity to be actively involved in priority setting and steering of ITS Canada's activities within this area. Transportation management providers and private sector representatives interested in learning about, sharing information on related technologies and industry trends, playing a role in related policy discussions are encouraged to contact Yannicka or one of the committee chairs. So that's myself, Jonathan Darton, or Jonathan Ford, if you'd like more information. It'd be great to have you join our committee and contribute. Moving along, the presenter for today's webinar really needs no introduction, as he's very well known within the ITS industry, including actively contributing through leadership roles within ITS Canada. Chris is a practicing professional engineer licensed in the province of Ontario. He has over 30 years of experience in both private and public sector environments. He's an associate partner at CIMA with the title of Director, Transportation. He's a proven leader in the integration of a wide variety of techniques and technologies in response to ITS, safety, and traffic operations issues. His project management experience involves multidisciplinary teams, and he has a reputation for quality in developing innovative solutions for clients across Canada. Chris recently became the past chair of ITS Canada and is on the executive committee. He has an excellent working relationship with clients, academics, consultants, and major equipment manufacturers and suppliers across Canada. Chris has owned an EV for almost 2 years now. During that time, he's learned a lot about them, and he's hoping to share his experiences with us over the lunch breakfast session today. Just a quick housekeeping note before we hand it over to Chris. If you have any questions during the session today, feel free to add any comments or questions you have to the questions section within the GoToWebinar panel. Towards the end of the session, Yannicka will help to review the questions with Chris. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. One a little quick thing before we get started. I just wanted to let you know that CIMA Plus is the proud sponsor of this Lunch and Learn today, and made a financial contribution to ITS Canada in order to help make this Lunch and Learn happen. So I'd like to do the quick YouTube thing and have a 30-second advertisement for CIMA up front, and then we'll jump right into the EV advertising. So CIMA is a multidisciplinary engineering firm across Canada. It's proudly a Canadian, headquartered in Laval, Quebec. Was founded in 1990 through the mergers of a number of Quebec-based companies at that time, but has since steadily expanded through a combination of organic growth, mostly organic growth, and some mergers. And it's 100% employee owned. This graphic just shows you CIMA's offices are coast to coast, ranging from Vancouver, oh, I jumped ahead, ranging from Vancouver all the way to Newfoundland. And we have staff complements, large complements in Quebec, Ontario, and Alberta, and growing offices in the other provinces. And our ITS services include a focus on smart transportation, all sorts of a wide variety of different ITS projects, ranging throughout the ITS life cycle, from strategic planning projects to needs assessments, to market scans, to system designs, procurement assistance, implementation, and evaluation. So please keep us in mind for your next ITS project. So thank you for that. So now we'll move on to the electric vehicle lunch and learn. And I do hope you find this both entertaining and perhaps a little bit educational. I hope it comes across as not being too serious, that it's a good diversion for you over your lunch or breakfast break, depending on where you are. And I do hope that maybe you learn something about EVs to take away as well. I hope that you find it fact-based. I did not intend this to be a sales pitch for EVs. I think we'll be discussing it, but there are advantages and disadvantages associated with electric vehicles. So we'll go through the types of EVs, some discussion on the charging stations, some supporting apps that are available for phones, some of the vehicle features and technologies, and then, as is often asked of me, well, it's great that you're running an electric car, but where does the electricity come from? Aren't we just moving the problem? So we're going to go take a tour across Canada and see where the sources of electricity come from. And if there is time, I've got some bonus material, which is the second life uses for old EV batteries. And if we have time, we'll talk about that as well. So let's dive right into it. So what are the types of electric vehicles? Well, there's a lot of vehicles that are electric. There's trains, there's buses, there's bicycles, there's semi-tractor trailers, there's snowmobiles, there's all-terrain vehicles, there's scooters, skateboards, rollerblades, just about anything that has wheels, there's probably an electric version of it. For today, I will be mostly discussing cars. So there's really sort of three types of EVs: the hybrid, the plug-in hybrid, and the battery electric vehicle. The hybrid generally uses a gasoline engine as the primary source for power and motion. But through regenerative braking, it can transfer some of the energy, the kinetic energy of the car, into electricity and store that into a battery. And then that battery powers an electric motor. So you can either get a very limited range of electric only, like in the matter of 5 to 10 kilometers, or you can use the electric motor to help assist the gasoline engine to get better fuel economy, or to help with the performance of the vehicle when it's under stress, so going up hills or during acceleration. The plug-in hybrid sort of removes the braking aspect of it, but but it allows you to plug the vehicle into a charger and charge up a battery set. And so it has a longer range than the hybrid, in which it can use the electric motor only. And then when you're kind of out of the charge of the battery, then the gasoline engine tends to kick in and keep the vehicle moving. So the ranges here are somewhere around sort of 50 to 100 kilometers typically. And as I say, that's a plug-in hybrid. Then we move to the battery electric vehicle, which is electric only. So there's no gasoline engine at all. And it plugs into a charger. It tends to have bigger batteries than the other two types. And once you run out of charge, your vehicle will stop because there's no other form of propulsion for it. This, I kind of like this graphic, although what it does is it tends to make the conventional car a bit of the bad guy, showing it in black with this big black emissions thing. But it shows the different sources of energy really between a conventional automobile, a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, and the all-electric, and the consumption sort of shifting from gasoline over to electric, and the implications that that has on the emissions. I found some stats. So a gallon of gasoline produces, after it burns through a car, produces 20 pounds of CO2. Or looking at it from the perspective of metric, 1 liter of gasoline produces 2.3 kilograms of CO2. So really, any gasoline that we can save does have some implications in terms of CO2 emissions. This is a graphic that was developed in 2014. You can see each of the cars are captioned 2014 models. And I think it's interesting to sort of see, even since 2014, so over about 5 or 6 years, how the ranges have changed on these cars. But it also shows that even for electric vehicles, there's 2 different types. There's the long range battery electric vehicle and the limited range battery electric vehicle. And then we've kind of covered off the other 2, the plug-in hybrid, which is the range extended, or the hybrid electric vehicle, which is the plug-in. And if we kind of look at the long range, and what was capable in 2014 is a range of about 425 kilometers. But today that range has increased to 600 and even in some models 700 kilometer ranges. And it continues to improve every year. In terms of the limited range battery electric vehicle, it's kind of gone from about 135 to 250. So it's improved even more, largely through the addition of more batteries in the vehicle. Now, I think what's interesting to note, although we often hear in the news every day of some quantum leap in battery capabilities, that really hasn't hit the marketplace yet. And that if we look over the last several decades, the battery efficiency has improved by 8% per year since the 1980s. And it has been very consistent in terms of the improvement of battery efficiency. So we may see a quantum leap in the future. That hasn't happened yet. We hear about it all the time in the news, but the fact is, for now, it's been a very linear improvement in battery efficiency and capability of 8% per year. This graphic sort of shows the top 20 electric vehicles that were sold in the world in 2019. And at the top of the list is the Tesla Model 3 at 300,000. The other one that many of us may be familiar with in Canada, and this is throughout the world, so some of these models may not be available through North America, but the other one many of us are familiar with is the Nissan Leaf at almost 70,000. Most of the others are between 30 and 50,000 vehicles in terms of their sales. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about charging stations now. So there is this thing called range anxiety, and I can attest to it. It's true. Running an electric vehicle, particularly a limited electric vehicle, limited range, is a bit like running an automobile with only a gas tank the quarter the size that you're used to. So you're constantly sort of looking at how much further can we go? And a lot of people ask me, okay, well, how long does it take to charge up your car? So we'll start there. So it depends on the type of charger. And the answer is actually simple math. So watts is equal to voltage times current. So a level 1 charger, that's the kind of charger you could take and just simply plug into a regular wall outlet, is 120 volts AC times generally about 10 amps. And that gives you 1.2 kilowatt hours of output of charge. If you look at the car's capacity, my car is an e-Golf, so it's a Volkswagen electric, and its capacity is about 36 or 37 kilowatt hours. So at 1.2 kilowatt hours, or kilowatts per hour, it's going to take about 30 hours from fully dead to fully charged to charge it. As we move to the level 2 chargers, we double the voltage and increase the current flow. So level 2 chargers tend to be either 3.3 kilowatt hours or 6.6. And so again, we do some simple math, and it would take me 11 hours or 5.5 hours, depending upon what level 2 charger I'm using. And then if I go and plug into a fast charging station, well, they have all sorts of volts and all sorts of amps, and generally the charging is limited by the car itself. So in terms of my car, it takes about 50 minutes, but it's very rare to run the battery dry. So it's mostly about half an hour. It's important to know that the EV chargers have a bunch of different connectors associated with them as well. So there's the Supercharger one, and the ones that are the most common are really the CCS. CCS stands for Combined Charging System, and the ChadeMO. So the one on the top middle and the one on the top right. The one in the middle row on the left, the J1772, is very common for level 2 chargers, and it forms the top half of the CCS SAE charger. It's that circle at the top. And then below that are the DC contacts for the fast charger. But it's just important to know that different charger stations have different plugs. Although, as I say, the CCS and the ChadeMO are by far the most two common. And then there's different brands. So there's a number of different manufacturers of charger stations. There's a few listed here: Chargepoint, Flow, Greenlots. There's many more. And Tesla seems to sort of do their own thing. So this is an example of a Chargepoint fast charging station. You can see that each sort of pump, if you will, or unit has two hoses associated with it. In this case, that one would have a ChadeMO connection and the other would have the CCS DC connector to it. They tend to try to put these in areas where you're close to amenities like restaurants or shopping plazas or washrooms or parks or hotels where people are going to spend a little bit of time, park their car, plug it in, leave it for an hour, and then come out and your car's all charged up. There's the Chargepoint ones are very common in and around the Toronto airport for those of you who have seen the charging stations near there. This is an example of the Tesla supercharger stations, and these have been sort of strategically placed not only within urban centers, but often you'll find these in between urban centers. So along the 401 corridor in Ontario, for example, or along the Trans-Canada Highway. And it's every so often. And Tesla, these are specific to the Tesla vehicles. So if you don't own a Tesla, you can stop here, but you can't charge. And so not only is Elon Musk able to sell you a car, he's now able to sell you the energy that you need for the car. But the Teslas will also work on some of the other charging stations with through adapters. We're also now seeing that gas companies are coming forward with fast charger stations as part of car washes and larger gas station complexes. So again, you could pull your car in, charge it up, use the amenities, the washroom and the convenience store, and then continue on your way. So Petro Canada, they started putting these charger stations in, and they were free last year, but in January of 2020, they started charging you something like 33 cents a minute. So it got expensive quickly. But Shell is doing the same thing, and I think a number of other gas companies are doing it as well. These are just some examples of the level 2 charging stations. Again, you see sort of the Chargepoint logo on the one on the left. It's pretty common. It's around, seems to be pretty common in Ontario anyway. And then the photo on the right is a photo I took. It's at Guelph University, and it sort of shows that there's parking spots that have been designated clearly for EV charging. And you have to, during regular weekdays, you have to pay to get into the parking lot, but you don't have to pay for the charge. So it's important to kind of look to see whether you sometimes pay for parking or you sometimes pay for the charge, or sometimes you pay for both. So it's important to sort of know when you map out your trip and you're going to use one of these level 2 charging stations. You want to make sure you're prepared for that. These are some of the home chargers that are available. There seems to have exploded a little bit, but there's a lot of different makes and styles and capabilities. Some of these are just chargers only. Some kind of plug into 220 volt sockets. Some are wired directly to the panel. Many of these will communicate through the intranet rather, so you can use it in an app and sort of see what the status is. It records status and statistics of your charging sessions while at home. Okay, so there's a number of supporting apps as well. These are popular ones that I use quite frequently. There are certainly others that are available for download to smartphones as well. The plug share is kind of, I'll switch to that. That's the plug share sort of shows all different brands of charging stations. And it shows them color coded by green and orange. The green ones are either level 1 or level 2 charging stations, and the orange ones are the fast charge stations. And a lot of people sometimes are a little surprised by the sheer number of charging locations that are around. Again, this one's close to the Toronto airport and zoomed out a little bit, but there's just hundreds of these stations all over the place. Now, many of them could be associated with car dealerships. And so if you tap on it, you will just want to be aware that that it's associated with a car dealership in case the dealership is closed when you want to access the station. So once you find a station and you plug it in, then you can use your phone to sort of monitor the charging. So the little screen capture that's on the left is shows you where your car is, and at the bottom it sort of shows you a quick summary of that it's charging. It's blue, and the little blue line goes from the wheels to the roof of the car as it charges, and how much. So if they're charging you, how much it would cost. So if we did some quick math here, you can see that for this particular session, I've paid $1 for 40 minutes of charging, and it's given me 23 kilometers of range. So that 23 kilometers for $1 is about half the price of gas, if gas is around $1 a liter. And if you charge at home, certainly it's a lot cheaper. It works out to be about a fifth the price of gasoline per kilometer of range. And if you kind of tap on the vehicle, you get some charging details. So the middle screen capture sort of shows you what your phone would look like if to get a little more detail, how the kilowatt hours have advanced over time. And then the one on the right-hand side is a different brand. So it's not the Chargepoint, it's the Flow. There is a Flow station at the Region Appeal headquarters, and it's free to use. You can see the cost is $0. And I would say maybe half of the chargers that are out there to 3/4 are actually free right now. Many of them will not charge you anything for the power. And the apps will show you whether there's a charge associated with it, and if so, how much. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the vehicle features and technologies. So this is a battery bank for the Chevy Bolt, and many of the electric vehicles contain these battery banks. Electric vehicles don't really have drive shafts necessarily, and there's no exhaust systems, and there's no gas tanks on them for the fully electric vehicles. So they can use the room within the chassis to put batteries instead of putting those systems. And there's sort of modules. The batteries themselves are gathered together in these modules or clusters. They designate the high voltage wires as orange wires, and those typically run about 337 volts DC through those orange wires. And if we took one of those little clusters and we opened it up, we would see inside even smaller battery cartridges. And these are a little bit bigger than, say, a C-size battery, but not much. They're about that size. And most electric vehicles today run with lithium-ion batteries, and there's just this whole pack of them made up of hundreds of these individual battery cells. You can see tubes kind of coming out of these modules. It's important to cool the battery systems when it gets very hot, or warm the battery systems when it gets very cold. So there are actually environmental controls associated with the battery packs on EVs. And a lot of people don't know what's under the hood. Is there anything like? And so this is under the hood of the Volkswagen. Most of those big boxes, you can see the orange wires again. So those are the high voltage wires. Most of those chrome colored boxes are actually converters to convert from AC to DC power so that they can charge the batteries. But it's also interesting to note that there's just a regular battery, car battery in there as well. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because all of the other systems within the car, like the power windows, the radio, the environmental controls, the seat warmers, everything else is made to run off 12 volts DC. And so the batteries within the battery packs of the EV will charge the regular 12 volt battery when it starts to get low. This is a picture of the dashboard, and I just wanted to raise this because you can sort of see on the left-hand side that there is a charge side and a percent power side. So as you take your foot off the gas, regenerative braking kicks in, and it shows you that it's actually charging the battery. And then as you tromp onto the accelerator, it shows you the percent of power available and how you're actually using the power that's coming out of the battery. So it becomes a bit of a video game as you're driving these things to try to save as much power as you can. And down at the bottom of that left circle is the range. So in this case, I captured this off the internet, shows the range is 155 miles. On the other side, it's a pretty standard sort of odometer or speedometer, I should say, and showing the speed that you're going. You can actually schedule your car to charge. So if it's plugged into a home charger, you can schedule it to be ready by a certain time. So in this case, the first box would be 7 a.m. on a Sunday. And you can say that you want it 100% charged or 90, 80, 70, 50, whatever percent you want it charged by 7 a.m. And the other thing you can do is you can kick in an environmental control so it will warm up the car while it's plugged in and defrost the windows as well. So if it's plugged in and you want it ready to go at 7, by the time you jump in, not only should the batteries be charged, but the car should be warmed up and the windows defrosted. So you're not using the energy out of the batteries to perform those functions. The other thing you can often do is charge the car overnight when the price of power is a little cheaper. The navigation systems in some EVs will also show you the range that you have. So it shows you where you are and how far you can go based on the power you have left in the batteries. So it's important to understand some of the things that influence the efficiency of your batteries as well. And one of the big things that influences battery efficiency is temperature. And this graph sort of shows, it kind of looks to me like a car going to the left, the profile of a sleek car traveling to the left. But if we look at the efficiency of a battery at 68 degrees or approximately 20 degrees Celsius, and we compare its efficiency at other temperatures to that, we see that the colder it gets, the lower the efficiency gets. So at 0 degrees Celsius, you're only going to get 80% of the efficiency out of the battery that you would at 20 degrees. And as it gets colder still, that can drop down to 70 or even 65 or below. And the same holds as you get warmer. So as you build up to 40 degrees Celsius, the battery efficiency will drop as well. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're ready to jump in the car on a very cold day, that you may not get the same range that you would if it were 20 degrees outside. The other thing that affects battery life is the sheer number of cycles, charging cycles. And so the life of the battery is very dependent upon how many times it's been charged. And whether you charge it to 100% and take it down to sort of a very low percent. So if you charge it to 100 every day and you drive it down to 25% battery remaining, then within 2,000 charging cycles, you will have lost about 15% of your efficiency, battery efficiency. The lithium-ion batteries are sort of in the most stable situation when they're about 45% charged, 45 to 50% charged. So if you go away on vacation and leave the car for a long time, it's a good idea to leave it at 50% charged. But if we go all the way to the bottom, if you only ever drove the car between 75 and 65% battery life, you get about 12,000 charging cycles before you lose 15% of the capacity. For me, I usually charge up to about 90 and drive it down to about 25, at least I did before the pandemic. So that would give me about 4,500 charging cycles. If I did that every single day, I'm still getting about 12 years out of my battery life before I lose 15% of its capacity. Okay, so a lot of people have asked me, okay, so aren't you just kind of moving the problem instead of producing the CO2 through your car, you're basically producing CO2 at the generating site. So I thought it was interesting to sort of take a tour across Canada and sort of see where the sources for electricity are. And I like this cartoon just because I think it's her biggest problem is going to be the thunder. But the other thing I think there's still definitely a stigma out there about, you know, where is all this electricity going to come from? And certainly different countries are in different situations, but Christophe de Margerie says, and he's the executive officer for French Oil, is saying, well, where's the electricity going to come from? Flowers? Well, maybe someday, but right now it comes from oil and gas. So let's kind of step across Canada and sort of see where the power comes from. So this is BC, sources of power in BC, and you can see that 91% comes from hydro sources. So this is, you know, dams and power generation sites associated with water systems, and 6% from biomass and geothermal. So a large portion of the electricity produced in BC would be through hydro. It's quite different when we move to Alberta, though. 49% is generated through natural gas and 43% through coal and coke. So a good portion of this is through sources that are not necessarily renewable or environmentally friendly, but the efficiency of these generating sites when we look at CO2, the efficiency of the generating site is still better than the efficiency of a gasoline-powered car. But nonetheless, Alberta does rely quite a bit on natural gas and coal and coke. Saskatchewan's very similar to Alberta, relying on those two sources as well as a little more hydro. By the time we get to Manitoba, things have shifted almost exclusively back to hydro again, with 3% through wind energy. And then through Ontario, 60% is through uranium. So that's the nuclear sites that are in, there are 3 large nuclear generating stations in Ontario, and they produce 60% of the power to the Ontario grid, with 26% coming from hydro and 7% coming from wind. So fairly renewable, well, if you consider nuclear renewable resources. And Quebec is about 95% hydro and 4% wind. So there's a lot of places that are producing a lot of power through renewable resources in Canada. This is going to flip to a website now. I think I've got time to do this. This one is the Independent Electricity System Operator. This is for Ontario. And I'm going to ask Yannicka. Now, can you see that?
Yes.
Or you can see that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. So it shows you almost instantaneously the demand. And again, this one's for Ontario. I assume there are other similar sites for the other provinces, although I haven't tripped across them yet. You can see the demand as of 11 o'clock today. So like an hour ago, the demand was 16.2 megawatts. And then it also shows you sort of where the supply is coming from as well in order to meet that demand. So 11.2 megawatts was coming from nuclear, 5 from hydro, 1.1 from gas, a small amount from wind and solar and biofuels. So I think it's kind of just interesting that in many places, the supply of electricity is tracked almost live or near real time. Okay, and now Yannicka, am I back to the slides again?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. That worked well. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time, so I'll spend another sort of 5 minutes going through some second life battery applications. So there are often concerns about, okay, well, what are we going to do with all these used batteries? What's going to happen? Well, this is a good graphic to show where used batteries are likely to come from and when. So you can see that electric cars and e-buses form, as time goes on, form almost the majority of the used batteries that are likely to be available. And you know, it includes other things, not just not just cars, but e-bikes, e-scooters, industrial automation, and other sources as well. This is the example of the Hornsdale Power Reserve that's on the south part of Australia. And it is a 309 megawatt wind farm. The power grid in southern Australia was fairly unreliable. It had a lot of brownouts and spikes in the electricity until this power farm or power reserve was constructed. And so all of the boxes, the turbines, of course, the wind turbines generate the electricity, and they charge up the batteries that are in those boxes. And it's just because a battery is down to 60 or 70% of its peak efficiency doesn't mean it can't still hold the charge. And so there are opportunities to use these batteries through a second life, applications like this. When dispatching at its peak output, the batteries themselves provide enough electricity to power the equivalent of 30,000 homes. So it's a fairly substantial part of the power infrastructure. Other companies are sort of coming up with innovative ideas like the reborn light. So this would be kind of a streetlight application with a solar panel. The solar panel charges the battery during the day, and then it provides a source of light during the night for things like walkways potentially, or parking areas, that kind of thing. Here in Toronto, there's been a partnership between Nissan and Eaton to produce systems that will help to offset the peak loads associated with things like sports stadiums. So when they come online and all the lights come on and all the people file in, there's a huge sort of spike in power requirements. But using battery systems, they can help to reduce that spike on the power grid. And then Renault this is in Europe. French automaker Renault wants to use banks of old electric vehicle batteries to make a 60 megawatt hour battery storage system for use on European electric grids as well. So that sort of brings me, I guess, to the end. I'm wondering if there are any questions that we've received throughout this.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this very insightful presentation on electric vehicles. So for anybody who has any questions, please use the question pane in the GoToWebinar panel to submit your questions. Unfortunately, Jonathan Darton had to leave, and he wondered if Chris, could you talk a little bit more? Are there any standards being developed in terms of interfaces being used for charging?
So yes, so definitely. What I showed you a whole bunch of different plugs. So those in effect are standard. The levels of chargers, the level 1, level 2, and fast charger systems are fairly standard as well. There is sort of a new breed of fast chargers that's coming on as well that has even greater capabilities. So as the range continues to increase with electric vehicles, the demand for power will increase. And there are some technologies that are being developed that allow much faster charging and longer ranges, but require much higher voltage. So the short answer is yes, there are standards now in place, and those standards continue to evolve. I think a lot of them sort of, a lot of them were driven by the early, the companies that jumped into the industry fairly early on, but they're slowly being revised, and so that everybody can use sort of the same set of standards.
Thank you very much. And a question that I have, many years ago, I guess with the introduction of electric vehicles, at least in Ontario, there were subsidies available for those individuals who were interested in purchasing an electric vehicle. Just wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about subsidies available, if any, with the purchase of an electric vehicle. And I guess maybe you could only speak for Ontario since that's where we are living.
Right, actually. So Ontario had some pretty aggressive rebate programs in place from the former provincial government, Liberal government. When the Ford government came into power in June of 2019, they canceled those programs. So there was a bit of grandfathering. Anybody that had a vehicle on order would be able to get the rebate, but any new purchases would not be eligible. I understand in Quebec, there was a fairly good rebate program. I'm not sure what the status of that is anymore. And I believe BC also had a rebate program in effect. But right now I am aware that the federal government offers a $5,000 rebate on any new electric vehicle purchases. So it's still a subsidized industry, I guess. The cost, in my experience, the cost of an electric vehicle was about $15,000 more for a new model car than the gas equivalent, where there were models available in both gasoline and electric versions. So it is certainly more expensive, and there's a bigger investment to make upfront during the purchase of an electric vehicle. You tend to get that back then through savings in paying for electricity over gasoline over the life of the car. But it is what it is. So a lot of people can't really afford that additional bump in cost when they're buying the car. And so that was the intention of these rebate programs, was to make them more attractive to potential buyers.
Thank you. And those are all the questions that I have. This webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be made available either later today or tomorrow. Just want to remind anybody who is interested or who has any connections to students in ITS that the student ITS essay competition due date for submission is June 19th, 2020. And our next webinar will be June 23rd, that's next week, Wednesday, by Transport Canada on an update on federal initiatives. I would like to thank Chris again for this wonderful and insightful presentation as part of our first Lunch and Learn. Thank you, CIMA, for sponsoring today's Lunch and Learn. Wish everybody a great day. And if you would like to contact Chris, I will be sending out with the webinar recording Chris contact information as well as email if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.